Productive Pastor 19, Why One Thing Matters. What's going on, friends? Welcome back to Productive Pastor, episode 19, Why One Thing Matters. We're going to get to that in just a second, but I hope you're doing good. How's your week finishing up? You know, all over Facebook, I see kids are going back to school. That means we're wrapping up the summer and all the things that matters. And I know that there's a lot of folks out there that are thinking about the next ministry year, because in so many churches, we really follow the school calendar, if you think about it. And I've got some stuff at the back end of this that I want to share and I want to talk with you about. And 3 fun, awesome things for the fall that are jumping on in there. But we're going to save that to the end. A couple things just to make you aware of. The first thing is, are you on the email list yet? Every week I try to send out an email that is action-focused to think about a certain element of productivity. And there's a lot of cool stuff in the works for those. Next couple weeks are going to kind of finish out the current thread, and then we're jumping into a whole new email reality. So if you're not getting those emails, cruise over to the show notes, revchadbrooks.com/pp/019, and sign up for that. Second thing is the Productive Pastor community. We're over there on Facebook. It's the Productivity Party. It's a great community of ministry leaders just all trying to do the same thing. And so think about jumping over there if you're not part of that yet. But episode 19, you know, why one thing matters, and it's a little bit different of a thing. Now, a couple of weeks back, I had an episode that I told folks I was kind of at my most anxious I'd ever had about sharing a specific part of ministry, and I heard back from so many folks about how they loved that episode. It was the episode about personal ministry vision and that sort of thing. And so what I want to talk about today, and for a couple of episodes, really is just kind of honing more in on this idea of personal vision and how it helps us make decisions, kind of filter things out, filter things in, all of that sort of thing. You know, a couple weeks back in the email, I shared about 3 ways that we can make decisions easier. And in that email, I broke down the ideas really into 3 points of clarity, of strategy, and policy. And what I want to talk about today is that first bit, clarity. Now, if you're old enough to remember the show Pee-wee's Playhouse, you'll remember that there is the word of the day. And whenever anyone would say it, everyone would scream. And since you normally watch the show on Saturday mornings, it is a word that you might hear kind of throughout the day. So me and my sister, we waited on it to be said on the show. And then in real life, just so we could scream, I'm sure it aggravated all of the adults. And if the word of the day was still a thing, clarity would be one of mine. If you want to start counting how many times I've used that word in these last, 6 months, last year, you would be able to get a lot of screams to aggravate those around you. Because I've learned how valuable it is. And so we're going to talk about decision-making today. We're going to talk about clarity under the idea of why one thing matters. Now, if you came here today expecting me to tell you there's one thing that matters above all, sorry, I can't help you do that. I think to throw something that broad out there that would apply to every single ministry and context, that'd be highly irresponsible. Cookie cutter ministry is aggravating to me these days. But what I do want to help you do is perhaps understand a larger idea about clarity and how it can help you learn more about whatever one thing exists inside of your ministry ecosystem in this moment. I've become incredibly fascinated. I'm going to talk about this in point 2 of this, by the people that are thinking deeply about what is the relationship of the local church and mission in our post-COVID context, because it is enormously more different than what it was beforehand. So many of the questions I hear from folks as we're having one-on-one conversations or in group sessions, that sort of thing, it boils down to it's like what's going on right now in this unique place. This is where clarity comes in and decision-making. And so before we're just going to jump into that, there's one thing that we're shooting for today in this conversation. Is for you to realize there's a value behind clear outcomes and clear behaviors. And we can only find clear outcomes and clear behaviors when we realize that only one thing matters to us. Now, We're going to have multiple moments of mattering. But what does it mean for when you're discerning something to focus in on this is the one thing that matters, and this is what we're going to use to make these decisions based off of? Like I said, clear outcomes and clear behaviors is what we're shooting for. And the idea behind this is searching for clarity at this level. We want to not just be able to name some sort of end result really well, but also realize that reaching, that end result, whatever it might be, and I think this is both personal and organizational. It can be inside of a spiritual development conversation. Inside some sort of project you have going at church. It can be part of writing a sermon. All of those sorts of things, the small steps we intentionally take will make that end result a natural outcome. And that's where we really see power of things, is not when we just fight or work for something to come into existence, but we change the shape of how we do things for this end result to be this thing we're wanting clarity and just dreaming over. And where we can get distracted in this is if we're always living in reactionary mode and just hoping that we name something will make it materialize, because it won't. Just declaring a goal and then never working on part of the process that doesn't make the goal come in, that's just luck, that's gambling. So let's talk about this process of clarity, about one thing and what it takes to start learning how to discover it. And we're going to kind of work through the same model in this conversation today. But the first thing is this: what is your one thing? Remember, I said I can't define that for you. And if somebody else is trying to define that for you, remember what I said about a cookie cutter approach to ministry. And I think that cookie cutter approaches to ministry lead people more into frustration than they do fruitfulness. The idea of selling some sort of program of, hey, do these 5 things and you will see X result. Those days are gone, my friend. What I care about with the whole productive pastor ecosystem, the whole thing, the whole fam, is helping you understand the unique contextual idea of priority and showing you how you can discern these things yourself, because you are the subject matter person in your mission field. So I was in a meeting earlier this week where some goals were being stated, and I'll be honest with you, I was frustrated because they were both super generic and super specific at the same time. One of these goals was just full of fancy buzzwords, and I had to ask, well, what does this mean? What does this mean? What does this mean? What does this mean? Before everyone at the table kind of realized this was just strung together in some sort of denominational reality. But the other one was super large and had no definition around it. It's what I call, there's the so that statement. It wasn't part of either of these conversations. One of them, like I said, was super, super generic. And the other one was so super specific and full of buzzwords that it wasn't really owned by anybody. It just sounded good on paper. And as I said many times over, the best resource you can have in ministry is the time to be strategic. Being strategic gives you the ability to know the why, to know the how. But that's a different conversation. Remember, we're talking about clarity today. Strategic was number 2. So do this real quick, okay? Just get out a piece of paper, open up a note on your app or wherever this is, but make a list of 5 things right now that are really important to you. Now, that can be important to you personally, important to you in your ministry, your organization, your church, whatever like that. But make a list of 5 things that are important to you. And after you get that list down, ask this: what purpose are these things serving? Why have we declared them to be important? Now, if they're important to you just because they're important to someone else, another person, or that's why you're spending energy on this, that's not good enough. Why does this matter? Remember the generic goal. Be curious in your answering. Be intentional. Think about, if this were to happen, what would be truly different? I think a lot of times churches throw themselves into these big, huge projects because they think it's just a thing to do. A great example of that over the last few years is how many churches, almost every church now, is live streaming. If the church is not live streaming, that is an oddity. And you don't see many churches of normal-sized churches thinking behind the intentionality of their live stream. It's just, we have this thing now, and we're just going to kind of leave it there. This sifting part of what is your one thing, what is the most important thing to you right now, and why, and usually the why behind why it's important will tell you how truly important it is. Like I said, but these decisions, this is the hardest part of the process. Discerning the difference between good and right is hard. Things can be really good, but they're not always necessarily right. So this is the model I want us to kind of run down as we have this conversation today. Your church could say, you know what, we need to clean out some of the kids' rooms so we have space for new Sunday school classes. And a person, that sounds like a very realistic thing that comes up at a board meeting or something like that people get a lot of energy behind. And, your church could really use the focus on cleaning out these rooms and creating new spaces. But that's not an end result. So when you ask, okay, why is this important to us? Is this a worthwhile thing for it to be the most important thing that we do? We find out a lot of times these goals are actually halfway goals because we've not thought about the so that. And we've also not thought about, well, if we are just kind of gambling and throw this out there, what happens if it actually works well? Like to use if we clean the kids' rooms out, we'll get more kids in church. Well, do you have the staff to handle a full Sunday morning if all those rooms are clean and full? Do you have enough volunteers to do that? Do you have the ability to make this thing actually healthy in the long run? If not, it's a waste of energy and focus. And maybe it's the idea of starting behind or before that. So, spend the time discerning and defining that one thing. Answer the question, this is why this matters over everything else. And like I said, sometimes the things you'll come up with are great midpoint goals to it. But make sure all of your answers have a really solid so that answer. Realize it might just be a place that you are stressed or other people are stressed and anxious, and a bunch of things get brought up and you come up with some sort of ministry project that's just a solution to the stress or the anxiety. It's not actually about ministry health or forward motion. Sometimes in churches, we become super busy because we have a prolonged lack of clarity and we don't know where we focus. This one thing, hear it. Our why has to be more compelling than the thing that seeks to distract us. That why is huge. Like many people, sometimes I get lost interneting around and I started asking myself the question, why did you come online? Because normally it was like a simple 15, 20, 30-second task that ends up me drifting for 15, 20 minutes inside of the internet. It's like I asked, well, why? Why did you come here? Because for me, that's a compelling enough reason to, let me get this done with and get it over with, because this is not the most important thing for me to be doing right now. So that's that first piece right there. What is your one thing? The second part of this, what could change the most? See, this is still inside of the realm of the so that, but it also means that we realize that many times if we're going to have one thing that's so important that we're going to call it our one thing, this is actually a multi-step process. So like I said, let's use the example of cleaning out old rooms in the church that are now used for all sorts of storage instead of the kids' classrooms that used to be. Sidebar, just comment on the thread in the Facebook group. What is the oddest thing you found in a church storage closet? I would really love to hear what you say that. But so we digress. We're back onto here. So we're thinking about this. So what about this statement? We want to clean out more kids' rooms so that we will have more space for new kids. That right there is a big, huge growth point from our previous idea of, let's just clean out the room because that means kids will come. So we're saying instead, no, we want to clean out the kids' room so that we will have more space for new kids. And begin exploring what this could change. And what would happen if you began thinking about and just being curious about how your congregation might be uniquely called to ministry to the whole families that have these children. That goes back to, the damage control of what if this thing actually does blow up. This is where we ask the question, if this is going to change everything, what would need to be in place for this change to happen? Is our Sunday morning offering, is it welcoming and engaging to the parents of these kids? Do we have a system in place to create engaged retention for these families? Asking ourselves questions about, what is the discipleship process for the older kids that are youth age inside of these families? Also, what does it mean to actually have 3 new classes of school-age kids going? How do we have to manage curriculum? How many volunteers do we need to do this in a healthy way? What are our check-in procedures? So you see what could have been just like this anxious decision in a board meeting when your church is freaking out because you don't have any kids or don't have enough kids. Well, let's just clean the rooms out and the kids will come. It's not good enough. But now just by being curious, you're lining out a whole idea of ministry. You're putting together these what Daniel M. calls the input goals that lead to the big thing. Because you see, like I talked about earlier, burning a bunch of physical effort, cleaning out rooms without a holistic plan for growth involving these families, all you're doing is just managing the anxiety. Think about how many decisions you make in ministry and how many times you're burning energy to just manage anxiety. And like I said earlier, if by some stroke of luck you start filling these rooms, you're going to be in an even bigger, worse pickle before, because the larger structure to manage and properly steward this mission, it won't be in place. So what if that statement was this? We feel called to reimagine our current children's spaces so that we can invest in the lives of families of school-aged children. See, that's getting there. That's getting a lot better. But you can make it even better by thinking just curiously about this. So listen to this revised side of the statement. First Church, this is the generic church name. First Church feels called to generational ministry, reimagining our approach to school-aged families so that we can offer focused ministry unique to our community. That's a lot better. And here's the thing. You get to discern and work towards what's unique about that ministry. And at this point, you're way past the, if we don't have kids here, we're going to die approach to ministry. And instead realizing there are specific calls to follow inside of this, and there are investments that we make inside of our community. And this gives you the space to not just dream for your church, but dream for the world around you. You are deciding and discerning ministry that can or would create what's maybe the truest version of yourself in this moment. Because just by being curious and asking these questions, what we realize is that we're following along with what God is already doing. I have this deep belief that you can push through whatever clouds things up and whatever keeps you from being clear by discerning what God is already doing and asking you to be a part of. And this is a model that some people call waking up. One of my favorite books of 2021 is called Leadership, God's Agency and Disruptions by Mark L. Branson and Alan Roxburgh. And I've actually just been devouring almost every single thing that these folks have been writing over the last couple of years. And what I love about it is this is post-pandemic theology. It is moving for the world that we live in right now. And in this, there's a chapter in this book that's called Practical Theology and Discernment. And inside of it is this idea of what could change the most is moving between what the authors call acting and reflecting within a posture of listening to God. And so this is an alternative starting point and sequence. They're not being reactive. They're not trying to control things. They're not trying to make things happen, but instead listening and discerning. This really what I love about this chapter is it follows along well with Mark Sayer's idea of we don't deconstruct faith and Christian practice, but we instead deconstruct culture around us. So they give this 5-part matrix inside of this chapter. So the first one is 1, name and describe the current praxis. So how do people in your community normally react to whatever thing you're praying about? Second thing, analyze the praxis and context using the resources of the culture. So why and how is it the way that it is around you? The third step is this, study and reflect on Christian texts and practices regarding the praxis and analysis. So you're going to think, okay, this is what's going on in our community around us. This is what culture says this. These are the reasons that culture drops. These are all the sort of things. So let's instead look at what does the church say? What does Scripture say? What does other Christian work say about these issues? This is the cultural deconstruction moment. The fourth thing is this, recall and discuss stories that are relevant to people's experiences and analysis. So, hey, why is there maybe a hole inside of family ministries in our community? What's going on here? Is anybody filling that hole? What might this look like? And talk to the people that it affects, both in your church and in the community. And the fifth move, the last move, is discern and shape new praxis and then test with experiments. So this is the exact opposite of major leadership decisions made in the space of anxiety in a board meeting. And I could stay here in this part of the conversation for a long time. But the work that you put in to define that one thing back in phase one. The stronger and more compelling your belief in that one thing being the right thing that will help you make these decisions, help you make this discernments. We can attach not just our own personal views, our own personal passions to this, but genuine cultural exegesis and biblical imperatives towards those that might be really, really, really needing ministry and the love of Jesus in your community. So this can bring significant further clarity to the kids' room conversations. And so here's this new statement based off of, people doing a lot of work in an average-sized town to find out what are some specific ministry needs that nobody is offering towards families. Like, where is there a hole inside of the wholeness that Jesus brings us? So hear this new that statement. Because our community has a perceived absence of resources for families who are living with children with special needs, we want to create children's spaces that are welcoming and inviting to kids that might not fit in with other churches. We will design a ministry that's observant and trained specifically for this so that we can bring ministry into a population that is currently not served. So see, this has just been a quick case study of moving from leadership anxiety in a board meeting, throwing spaghetti against the wall, towards taking the time to craft very, very, very specific driving statement of how this can change things. And it's not changing your church or trajectory of operations. It's changing the community around you. And the third thing is this: what will you do? What will you not do? Honestly, by the time we get to this point in time, this is easy things. If you've done the discernment work, if you've done declaring purposes and asking why, if you've been curious and you've dreamed about what could be possible and you've prayerfully engaged the presence of God towards where he already is, then the moments of what you will do and what you will not do, friends, we're talking about bullet points here because you know what you're working towards. And this what will you do, what will you not do simply becomes to, we will do this so that, and you have a non-generic answer. Or we won't do this so that we avoid this. Begin getting just crystal clear clarity that fights through just the leadership anxiety that we see in churches now. And so, like I said, this is a really big picture idea of this whole process, but I wanted to share it today because what I see in so many conversations with so many ministry leaders is just the pressure to do everything, to find a solution to everything, feeling tremendous pressure to do things just because. And so I hope that this little case study on the power of just asking really, really good questions and believing that God will lead you to a place, it just shows you the power of clarity and why it's worth the work here. But like I said, case study that's there. Would love to hear back from what you think about just this idea of the power of like why one thing thinking matters. You can do that in the comments in the show notes, or really in that productive pastor community on that thread for the new episode there, because that's where we kind of tend to hang out at. So I told you at the very end, we got some promises coming up, what's happening with the fall season for productive pastor and that sort of thing. And I'm not talking so much about episodes. I've got a couple cool things in the tank. But what I want to talk about is these other options, these other resources that we have. And we're going to kind of go from like a very low level to a very, very high level. So the first thing is this. I'm working on a 5-day email mini course. It'll be 100% free. It looks at how you can build clarity in 15 minutes a day over the course of 1 week. I'm hoping to have this out in the next week or so, but this is just a great way that you can just learn some simple exercises that you can always be using to find clarity wherever the situation is. So that's the first thing. Second thing is I'm working on a Trello 101 course. Hope to have it out in September. And what it's going to do is it's going to teach the basics of Trello by working on personal management. I'm a big fan of working systems and keeping systems. Trello is my preferred working system, but it's going to be like probably 4 different modules. It won't be very, very expensive. Be heavy video based, tons and tons of resources inside of it, just a way for pastors to understand what does it mean to just manage themselves as good as possible. And the last thing is this will be a little bit of a higher investment, but we just finished our summer learning communities and they were huge. We're going to do a fall learning community. And what we're going to do for the fall is we're going to look at some of these things that we've talked about with decision making and clarity. But we're going to have a larger conversation about building out focused schedules. Think the back half of season 1 of the podcast, the year, the quarter, the month, etc., that sort of a thing. We're going to bring those two conversations together to think about how we spend our time in ministry and how we focus on things. But all of these new things, they take something from what we talked about today. And one of the things I'm learning is this overarching part of Productive Pastor in this season is a conversation about the relationship between discernment and action. I think learning these lessons personally will allow us to lead them inside of our congregations and places of ministry. And if this is something that you're really, really interested in, just hang on, because this is what we're going to be talking about. And I'll see you in the next episode.